An invisible enemy killing Americans one breath at a time.
Welcome to WatchMojo, and today we're discussing the untold story of the Anthrax Attacks in the shadow of 9/11.
But if Ivins mailed the letters, what possibly could be the motive? Why terrorize the country?
For this video, we're looking at one of America's worst ever biological incidents and the subsequent multi-year FBI investigation. Will you be watching the Anthrax attacks? Let us know in the comments. The first wave of attacks. Just 1 week after the September 11th attack on the World Trade Center, 5 letters containing anthrax spores were mailed to multiple media outlets, including ABC News, CBS News, NBC News, and the New York Post, 4 of which went to locations in New York City. 1 letter went to the National Enquirer at the American Media Inc. or AMI office in Boca Raton, Florida. The letters were dated September 18, 2001, with a postmark from Trenton, New Jersey.
Someone somewhere in the world had access to the deadly substance anthrax, the knowledge to work with it, and an environment appropriate for its handling.
In late September, several people developed lesions, including an editorial assistant at the New York Post, a letter carrier at West Trenton Post Office, and Tom Brokaw's assistant at NBC News. An ABC producer's infant son was also hospitalized for a rash. Some reported flu-like symptoms and were later diagnosed with either cutaneous anthrax, contracted through the skin, or inhalation anthrax through the lungs, which is almost always fatal. Patients were given antibiotics, usually ciprofloxacin or Cipro.
My breathing had become so shallow that I was actually panting like a dog would breathe.
On September 30th, 63-year-old AMI photo editor Robert Bob Stevens began to feel ill and was hospitalized, being treated with penicillin. On October 5th, he died of inhalation anthrax, making him the first anthrax death in the U.S. since 1976. Stevens' death was treated as a, quote, isolated case at first.
But the letter had been thrown away, its origin unknown. Suddenly, federal investigators were thrust into the world of bioterrorism.
The second wave of attacks. 2 more anthrax-laced letters were mailed on October 9th, each sent to a Democratic senator. The return address was from Greendale School, later discovered to not exist, in Franklin Park, New Jersey. When intern Grant Leslie opened the letter addressed to Senator Tom Daschle on October 15th, white powder spilled onto her. It later tested positive for anthrax.
And white powder immediately fell out all over me.
Out of the 22 people infected with anthrax, 5 of them died, all suffering inhalation anthrax, the most deadly type of infection. After Stevens, 3 more people would die in October: Thomas Morris Jr. on the 21st and Joseph Kursine on the 22nd, both Washington postal workers, as well as New York City hospital worker Kathy Wynn on the 31st. On November 21st, 94-year-old Connecticut woman Ottilie Lundgren also died. The source of Wynn's and Lundgren's exposure to anthrax is still unknown.
The deaths of Kathy and Ottilie were especially puzzling. Authorities concluded they had somehow come in contact with anthrax-tainted mail.
Amerithrax Investigation. Having occurred so soon after 9/11, the letters were initially considered an act of bioterrorism by al-Qaeda. But once the U.S. Army's Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, or USAMRIID, at Fort Detrick, Maryland, examined the spores, they determined it came from one specific strain.
The so-called Ames strain was confined to only 6 research labs in the U.S. That led FBI profilers to conclude the anthrax attacks were probably not the work of international terrorists.
The Ames strain was the, quote, anthrax of choice for the military's bioweapon vaccine program, meaning the experts helping the FBI became suspects themselves.
They gave the investigation an official FBI name, Amerithrax. The agents reasoned that the killer was a homegrown scientist, maybe even one of the scientists helping them on the case.
In January 2002, Dr. Stephen J. Hatfill, a pathologist and former bioweapon scientist at USAMRIID, was interviewed by FBI agents. On June 25th, the FBI searched Hatfill's home in Maryland and a storage locker in Florida. However, they did not find any hard evidence of the crime.
But inside the apartments of both Hatfill and his girlfriend, there were no telltale spores or equipment that could have been used to produce anthrax.
In an August press conference, Stephen Hatfill was officially named a person of interest by Attorney General John Ashcroft.
Mr. Hatfill is a person of interest to the Department of Justice.
And though he wasn't actually charged with anything, Hatfill had to continually publicly defend himself. He later held press conferences of his own to declare his innocence in the anthrax attacks.
I am not the anthrax killer. I know nothing about the anthrax attacks. I had absolutely nothing to do with this terrible crime.
The FBI searched his Maryland residence 2 more times with the same results. Regardless, the intense investigation and media coverage negatively affected his reputation. In 2003, Hatfill filed a lawsuit claiming violation of privacy, and on June 27, 2008, he was awarded a $5.8 million settlement against the government. Months later, the Justice Department formally exonerated Hatfill.
It would take nearly 5 years before Hatfill was officially cleared.
Dr. Bruce Edwards Ivins. Between 2005 and 2006, the FBI became interested in another potential suspect, Dr. Bruce Edwards Ivins, a highly respected member of anthrax vaccine research at the Fort Detrick lab. Like everyone else who worked at the Maryland lab, the civilian microbiologist had access to anthrax. The genetic origin of the spores used in the attacks matched a flask labeled RMR 1029, which Bruce Ivins was in charge of. Investigators found his time spent working in the lab after hours suspicious.
The FBI discovered Ivins had spent a lot of time alone at night in the lab.
But it wasn't unusual for him to keep those hours. It also wasn't sufficient time to produce the anthrax and go unnoticed by colleagues. They found no physical evidence of spores on his equipment.
Ivins' colleagues also insist it would have been impossible for him to produce the powder unnoticed.
On April 11, 2007, Ivins was put under surveillance. Then, on November 1st, investigators searched Ivins' home and interviewed him and his family. No spores were found, but in his basement, they found a collection of strange items, including several guns and women's underwear.
There's all kinds of strange stuff. There's lyrics dedicated to Krista McAuliffe, the astronaut who died on the space shuttle.
When Ivins was brought in for a formal interview, he explained his intense obsession with the Kappa Kappa Gamma, or KKG, sorority, stemming from a rejection in his college days at the University of Cincinnati.
The fence outside our home and the car that belonged to my fiance had been spray painted with red paint with Kappa Kappa Gamma.
He admitted to conducting late-night surveillance and break-ins. Interestingly, the only mailbox to test positive for spores was near the Princeton University campus, and investigators learned there was a KKG chapter nearby. A combination of factors led Ivins to become the prime suspect, including his past psychiatric problems, discovered through medical records and emails. Ivins confided in therapists and co-workers that he felt like he couldn't control himself.
The emails revealed 2 sides of Dr. Ivins.
Investigators also believed Ivins tried to mislead them by submitting false anthrax samples to show that RMR 1029 was not the source of the anthrax letters.
But the sample Bruce Ivins gave them from RMR 1029 did not match. To investigators, it was proof Ivins was trying to mislead them.
Ivins was involuntarily checked into a psychiatric hospital in June 2008, and the next month, the FBI told Ivins he would be prosecuted. However, charges could not be filed because in late July 2008, Ivins overdosed on acetaminophen, or Tylenol PM, seemingly taking his own life.
It destroyed his liver and shut down his kidneys.
In the months leading up to his death, Ivins was forced out of his place of work and had an outburst during a group therapy session.
That he was going to go out in a blaze of glory.
On February 19, 2010, the FBI declared Bruce Ivins as the lone perpetrator in the 2001 attacks.
And we are confident that had this gone to trial, we would have proved him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
But while the FBI officially concluded their multi-year investigation, many questioned the accuracy. The National Academy of Sciences reviewed the FBI's scientific methods used during the investigation. In 2011, their findings revealed that there was insufficient scientific evidence to prove Dr. Ivins was the culprit.
It is not possible to reach a definitive conclusion about the origins of the B. anthracis in the mailings based on the scientific evidence alone.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. The Anthrax Attacks, in the Shadow of 9/11. Netflix's The Anthrax Attacks is slated to premiere September 8, 2022. The documentary combines interviews with investigators and survivors, along with scripted dramatic reenactments based on FBI documents. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s Clark Gregg steps into the role of Dr. Bruce Ivins.
It makes itself seem harmless, slips past the defenses.
How do we know that they were being helpful? Each one of them became a suspect.
Check out these other clips from WatchMojo, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.